All right, guys, it's cold and we're back at the guiding trailer, so that means time to talk some more gear. Today we're talking about these puppies right here, Bipods. Right there, you've got a $1,000 one. Right there, you've got a $50 one, and everything in between. Here's the deal on Bipods. I can go to an experienced guide that worked for me. We're talking about a guide who's guided 30 elk hunts, 30 deer hunts, right? And I'll ask him, hey, what's the most underrated gear that someone should bring when they come and hunt with you? And they'll say a good bipod. And then I'll ask another one of my guides who's done the same thing, has comparable experience. He's guided dozens of hunts. And I'll say, what is the most overrated gear that guys should not bring or should really kind of put to the side when they come hunt with you? And again, they'll say a bipod. Why this massive dispersion, right? I'm going to dive into that, and that's what this whole video is about. I'll get into the details about these specific bipods here. The reality is there's as many bipods as there is bino harnesses out there, right? So it's a lot of personal preference, but there's also a system to making sure that you get the right one. It doesn't really matter about the price, guys. The price is relevant, but not relevant. I'll dive into it. The primary thing is you know the framework, so you're getting a bipod that fits your hunting situation, fits what you're trying to accomplish. So let's dive right into it. The biggest mistake that we make when buying a bipod really has to do with the reality of our hunting situation versus the ideal situation that is either proposed to us through marketing, what we see in shooting courses, what we see from military trainers, whatever, right? All this exposure we get to shooting, this kind of ideal situation. And it really comes down to the prone position. My experience, although it is across a lot of different hunters that I've guided and my own experience, it is still a subset of the hunting opportunities out there. We're talking about mountain, mule deer hunting, elk hunting, bear hunting, right? Primarily in the mountain environment, the backcountry environment. You could be in a totally different environment where this applies less. But what I have found is that the prone position for actual shot opportunities tends to only be used maybe 20% of the time. And a lot of people think that they're going to shoot that way 90% of the time or 95% of the time because, yes, it is the most solid position for them. So if they're shooting at ranges or they're going to classes or whatever, they're taught to shoot prone when they can. A lot of times when we think about where we're going to take our shots from, we're assuming that we're going to be able to lay on a flat platform, right? So when I say a platform, I mean from where we're shooting from, right? So we've stalked the animal, we've gotten to position, and now we're going to take a shot, but we're in the mountains, right? So we're trying to find a nice flat platform to shoot from because this is what we've been taught. You've got to find a nice, good spot to shoot prone from. Guys, biltong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Biltong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky, a great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content. Go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. For a bunch of different reasons. One, you want to get behind the rifle nice and straight so you're shouldering that rifle correctly. You're not off, off at an angle and you're not able to take that recoil correctly. That's one factor. The other factor is it actually allows us to have some mobility in terms of going up with our rifle's muzzle, right? Going up so we can shoot above us slightly, or we can shoot below us slightly if we're on a nice flat platform. Now, that goes away if our platform is angled, because if our platform is angled, we're already turned down, our muzzle's down, right? So our platform is at an angle like this, regardless of where the animal is. If the platform is angled like this, it makes it very hard for us to tilt down, right, to get any elevation with our muzzle. And the reason this is our body is basically this way, but we're trying to get the muzzle to point up, right? So we create a kink. You basically have a kink like this, right? That's a big issue with not having a flat platform, but it's pretty darn realistic when you're out there in the field. The other thing that's really relevant when it comes to having a flat platform or not realistically being able to get a flat shooting spot is it affects how we can use our bipod, right? If we're on an upward platform, right, it's angled up, so we're laying like this, we're actually going to need this bipod to be shorter, right? If we're just shooting straight, because we've got it above us, and now some of the elevation is actually being taken up by the platform being angled up. And then the same thing if the platform is angled down. So if I'm shooting from a slope position downward, I actually need more bipod, right? I've got to get those legs out there more because that slope is eating up some of that elevation that the bipod's giving me. I'm going to get into why this is super relevant when we choose bipod, but right now I'm just talking about reality versus what you actually see in the field. So that's the platform, right? So yes, if you have a nice flat shooting position, you can shoot prone most of the time, but for the reasons I mentioned, a lot of times you can't find that out in the field. And the other thing is it gets you screwed up. If you always have to shoot prone and you always need to find that flat platform, and that's your mentality, and that's the equipment you have is set up for that, the bipod is set up for that you have in your rifle, you have to shoot prone. It can screw you up on stocks, it can screw you up in the hunting scenario because you don't always have a ton of time to find that flat position. And it can mess you up. You want to be comfortable and adaptable to multiple positions, multiple platforms in the hunting scenario. You don't want to get stuck on having to shoot prone. All right, so the next thing when it comes to prone position and why it is a lot less likely than a lot of people think, and that's the angle of the actual shot, right? So we're no longer talking about the platform. We're talking about, I'm set up here, let's say I'm on a flat platform, I got lucky, but I might have to shoot down at an animal, I might have to shoot up at an animal. In prone, it's actually fairly easy to shoot down at an animal, particularly if you've got a rear bag that can be manipulated. You can use your pack as a rear bag. You can actually lift the back of your rifle, and a lot of guys will do that to get downward angle at an animal. Now, the limiting factor is if you have to shoot up, right? So if you have to shoot up from the prone position, it's going to be difficult. You want that muzzle to go up, and you're going to create a kink. Basically, you can't kink your neck to get under that rifle and align your scope because you're shooting up. So prone tends to only be good for a flat shot or shooting down when we're talking about practical mountain hunting. So pretty limited just based on where the animal is. One thing that's related to this that I want to touch on, and that's follow-up shots. So if you're in the prone position and you are able to acquire that animal below you, flat to you, one of the issues is what that animal does after you shoot. So if you purely miss an animal, a lot of times it's going to run up in the mountains out through some exit path, right? It's going to go up through a saddle, it's going to go up over a ridge. So you're going to want to manipulate your rifle, manipulate your rest, and get where you can shoot up, right? You can take a flat position to a angled up position fairly rapidly. You want to be able to do that. From prone, it's actually fairly difficult to do that. Now, if you wound an animal, and this is much more relevant because once you've wounded an animal, it's very pertinent that you get some more shots into the animal. In this case, typically the animal is going to side hill or is going to go downhill. And the same thing here, you want to be able to now manipulate the muzzle of the rifle downhill. Now, a lot of guys are going to want to stop the conversation right here and be like, well, Cliff, you don't shoot properly, because the way that I shoot is I always have my rear bag, how I hold my rifle in the bag in the back set, and then I adjust my bipod and everything up here to adjust that angle. Go for it, guys. You can assume that you can do that in the field, but the reality is it's very difficult to do in real world conditions. And the reason is the next thing I'm going to talk about that interferes with prone a lot, and that's vegetation, right? If there's any vegetation, there's any rocks, whatever, you've got to get a little elevation. So I actually had a sheep hunter blow up a rock that was about 10 feet from his muzzle because in his sight picture, he could just see the ram. He couldn't see the rock. I was focused on the ram, waiting for the shot. He shot, scared the shit out of us, and blew that rock up. He really needed to get up at a higher level, and that's really common up in the mountains. And in order to deal with that in a dynamic situation, it's very hard to have a set rear rest, you know, your backpack, a bag, whatever, and be adjusting the front. You end up having to manipulate up and down with the stock of your rifle. It's just the reality of it. The last thing I'll mention about prone, and I am going to get to bipods, but this is important that I pound this in. The last thing that I want to talk about prone and why it's a lot less realistic than people think is it takes people a long time to get situated and comfortable in prone. I mean, I've seen this on a bunch of hunts, but I vividly remember being above a billy within 200 yards, a big 9.5-inch billy in Colorado, a stud of a goat, and having the hunter that I was guiding sit there for at least 2 minutes trying to get prone because that was the only position he was comfortable shooting from. And it was actually a downhill shot, but we were in the rocks and he just couldn't get comfortable. And because there's so much contact with your body on the surface, and of course that's what makes it such a stable shooting position, but because there's so much contact on your body, it's also really uncomfortable, particularly for people who haven't practiced it on, you know, platforms that are angled, scrunched up. They've got to angle a little bit. You can't be perfectly behind the rifle because of the rocks, because of the terrain, because you can't move very much because the animal's right there, all of those things. It's much harder for people to get comfortable and get to that shot opportunity quicker if they're focused on prone. All right, so I've shat on the prone shooting position as much as I really need to at this point. The point is, you need to be able to shoot prone because it's a great shooting position, but I talked shit about it for a reason, because it's a lot less realistic than we think it is. So what's the next position that I see us use a lot in the backcountry, a lot in the mountains? That's the seated position. You know, I like to do Indian style, framed in my knees. That is the most common position that I see. And I personally think that you need to have a setup and you need to be comfortable shooting both of those positions. At the cost of stability, and really just some stability, we can move to the seated position that I'm mentioning. I like to frame inside my knees like this. So this seated position, it solves all the issues we just discussed at the cost of a little stability. I would argue that with a really good bipod that's the right height, the right framing here, you know, a right manipulation of a backpack for a rear bag, controlling all the space here, we can get that loss of stability versus prone way down. But there's some huge advantages in the hunting context with this position. Well, let's go through the list. So the first one, look how much contact I have with the surface right here. It's just my butt a little bit, my feet here, and the bipod ends, right? I don't have to put my whole body here. I can get right behind the rifle, perfectly aligned with the rifle, and not have to have a giant platform to be on, right? So that solves that problem. The next problem, having a platform that is angled, right? That is not flat. Well, it's actually not that big a deal for me from this position because I have a lot of ability to manipulate, right? I can squeeze my knees, go down, loosen my knees, go up, let alone adjust my bipod here, right? So I have a lot of ability to manipulate that angle that I don't have if I'm laying prone, I'm dealing with a really angled platform I'm shooting off of. Now, the next thing is vegetation, rocks. On that problem, you can see my muzzle is now much higher, probably at least double the height of where I would shoot prone typically. So that clears any rocks in the vicinity, like the issue that I talked about, and also just any vegetation, grass or whatever that is going to obscure your view, all of that. This is going to help on that front a ton. And then the last one, I'll show you by demonstration. Take the bipod, put it into how I would carry it. So as I mentioned, if I wanted to get prone, I've got to get full body down on the ground. I've got to get behind my rifle. But if I want to shoot from seated position, all it is here is drop these out, open them up, sit down. If I've practiced enough, I'm going to be right there in the right height range to just go straight to my seated and frame position, get square behind the rifle. I don't have to worry about getting comfortable behind the rifle like I would in prone position. So, as you can see, basically knocks off all of those cons of the prone position, and this is why a lot of your hunting shots in the mountains are going to be from the seated position if you're capable and ready for it. And a taller bipod is going to allow you to do that. The first thing I mentioned where some guides are crapping on bipods and some are very pro bipod, it really has mostly to do with how well prepared the last few hunters that guide has guided on this front. If all they have is a bipod with them that they can only shoot prone on it, all that hunter or that guide remembers is that bipod being annoying. Can't get it into the scabbard. It's heavy, it's long, it's in the brush. The hunter has to manipulate it. He's taking forever to use it. And then when the shot opportunity arises, he can't even use it because he really needs a higher position like the seated position. So that's the big issue. So now let's dive into looking at these bipods so you know how you can perfect that. And you can get a bipod that you can use in both positions. And if that's not possible for whatever constraint, budget, what's available to you, all of that, I'll show you some workarounds. And also we can talk about maybe you don't even need a bipod because perhaps there's some other solutions out there that are just better for your use case. So the challenge you're gonna have if you're a short guy. All right guys, so I wanted to mention that I'm having these custom skinning knives made. These are called Cliff Skinner. I've got a whole bunch of reasons why I've had this knife made the way that it's made. Got a short video on the website. The details are there. pursuitwithcliff.com. Click in the corner up by shop. You'll see Cliff Skinner. Click that puppy. You'll get all the details. Your challenge is going to be shooting prone off of a bipod that you can shoot seated. The seated height is going to be no problem. Like most of these bipods, with the exception of like a Harris, you're not going to have a problem shooting seated off of it because it's going to be tall enough. But it's going to be a question of whether or not that extendable bipod, you can get it short enough to comfortably shoot prone off of. So an example here, these cheap Harris bipods, you're not going to have a problem. All right, they're set at prone. It's going to be low enough for you, probably not going to have any issue. Check out this GunWerks. This is their Elevate bipod, I believe. And when you look at it right here, you look at the two heights, same thing. For the most part, this right here, you're not going to have trouble shooting off prone regardless if you're a short guy because it even widens out and you get even lower than the Harris. Like you can see, you're getting pretty darn low there. Now, what you just saw is relevant when you're picking a bipod is usually when they extend, you can't go in between. There's not in between spots where you can set it, right? You've got to use the length of the legs there. So, you know, that's just something to think about when you're actually looking at them. But the question is can you get it low enough if you're a short guy? You're not going to have a problem with a lot of these, but for instance, for me personally, I'm a 6-foot guy. The hatch bipod with the, you know, the three joints, well, 4 joints, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one here, it works perfect for me as a 6-foot guy. I can shoot off of it prone and I can shoot off of it seated. Now, I have a guide who worked for me for years who is a little bit shorter than me. He's like 5'8". He can't get this bipod low enough to shoot prone on, so he can't use it. Now, just as an example, when you look at this when it's extended, it doesn't actually look like it's much higher than a Harris bipod, right? But it is just by like a ½ inch. That's all the difference there is there, right? It's just a ½ inch, but those little differences make a huge difference. And that's one thing you should, you know, try to consider whenever you're shopping for a bipod. Try to get them in a situation where you can try them on your rifle because the mounting system is going to matter a little bit. Like if you look at this GunWerks rifle, the mount right here is actually in the stock, right? So because of that, in the prone position on the bipod, it's actually going to sit a little bit lower. Whereas if the mount is on the outside, it's going to sit a little bit higher. So that's going to, play into the ergonomics on your rifle. You want to consider that, right? If you're short, pay attention to making sure you can shoot prone on it. Now, if you're tall, pay attention to making sure that you can shoot in that seated position. Now, take the hatch bipod again. Back to me being a 6-foot guy. No problem shooting prone on it. And then for me, when I extend it out, it's perfect. I have a little flexibility. If I happen to be on a little downhill slope from the platform perspective, I'm still gonna be able to shoot off this seated, no problem. But I have had several guys that I've been guiding that are 6'1", 6'2", and when they get this bipod on their rifle, or if they're using it on my rifle, they're unable to shoot seated. They just can't get low enough. So you have to factor that in. Again, just like an inch matters, right? As you go through a bunch of different bipods and you look at all that's out there, you're gonna find a solution. And a good option here is the MDT. Now this is a $1,000 bipod. There's probably a bunch of reasons for that, but I'm gonna give you one reason: ability to fit the prone position, fit the seated position, and everything in between. There's a lot of complexity in this thing. I'm sure there are good bipods that can accomplish this at half the price, maybe a third the price, but I wouldn't go too cheap when you're demanding a bunch of adaptability, because every one of these joints, every one of these, these contact points, every little aspect of this bipod needs to be smooth, durable, and reliable all of the time. If it's not worth having, because it's going to ruin a hunt, or it's going to ruin multiple hunts if it doesn't fit all those criteria. And as these get more complicated to fit those different shooting positions, you're going to run into that. So if you go this route and maybe you're a unique body type, maybe you just want ultimate flexibility, consider getting a little more expensive bipod to accommodate those. On this MDT bipod, the way it's going to get low is, again, extending the legs completely out, okay? Now you can look at that there and you can see that. Now the problem that you're going to run into is, as you have more height adjustment, if you look at this, this has got 3 very long joints in it, right? Or 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, but each joint is longer than the hatch. No problem for anybody, including a real tall guy, including a guy on a really steep downward platform or whatever. He's not going to have any problem shooting seated with this. But in order for it to be low enough with these longer legs on it, look how wide that thing is, right? So again, we're going to have more platform, a better area to shoot off of, because we need it to be wide enough for us to get the rifle down low. So there's always trade-offs there, right? So you've got the cost, you've got the complication, all of that. And I'm not saying anything about the particular bipods I'm showing you. I'm just telling you that you want to hit the mark as close as possible. You don't want to go out and buy the most flexible bipod there is, because you're going to end up with an expensive solution. You're going to end up with a bulkier solution, a heavier solution, and a longer solution, right? So if you look at this bipod compared to the hatch, right? For me, if I can get away with the hatch in a hunting situation, I'm going to go with the hatch all day, every day, just because of that. It's lighter, it's shorter, and for me personally, it fits all the positions that I'm going to shoot from, right? With a little flexibility for an angled platform. Now, if those factors don't matter that much to you, the money's not that big a deal, you want a lot of flexibility, you want to make sure that you can shoot off of it seated, you can shoot off of it prone, your 5'5" girlfriend can shoot off of it, both those positions. You can shoot on an extreme downward, platform, so your legs are going to be way out. You want all that flexibility, and you don't mind carrying it, then this is a phenomenal bipod. It's better than the hatch from all, in that scenario. The MDT is for sure better than the hatch, but I'm a very big proponent of trying to fit that bipod exactly to be able to shoot those two positions. Another kind of flip side of that, this GunWerks Elevate bipod, I love it. And like I showed before, it gets actually really low, right? You can shoot prone there, and then you can pop it up, and you can shoot prone there, and then you can let the legs out. It's actually got a pop on this joint, and then it's got a traditional tensioner knob on this, which is kind of nice. For me personally, I can't shoot seated on this. It's just a little too short. Even if I bring it in here to the closest position, it's still a little too short. And the reality is here, there's a little bit of a downside too, because as I get up high, I don't have as much stability in there, right? So I've basically pounded that to death. Have an adaptable bipod. If for whatever restraints you're going through, the ergonomics, your height, you know, the type of hunting that you're doing, maybe it's really extreme terrain, so you're always going to have a crazy platform difference, right? So now you need a really short bipod that gets really long. You need to consider if it's actually worth it, and for you to consider that, you have to kind of look at the different options, right? One option is you can always say, I'm just going to use my bipod just for the prone position. I don't care what Cliff says. I don't care that that's going to be, you know, probably just a segment of my shots. I still want to have a bipod just for that, and then I'll have a different shooting rest for other positions, including seated. I think that's a fairly reasonable concept. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And if you're going to go that way, there's nothing wrong with one of these inexpensive Harris bipods. They're fine for prone shooting. I do suggest that you get the version that cants. It has a little cant on the top. It'll just be a whole lot easier for you and a lot less frustrating if you have a little cant there where you're not always having to adjust the legs on your bipod in order to get your rifle flat. But that's my only suggestion on that. Great bipods for the prone position. The other option they would say, if you're going to go that route, is this GunWerks, this Elevate bipod. This thing is super lightweight, and the way it goes on the rifle makes it very handy in this situation, if you ask me, because if I'm only shooting off a bipod when I'm prone, I don't want to have the bipod on my rifle all the time. I want to have this thing somewhere readily available on my backpack, maybe in my, you know, one of my big pockets on my pants, somewhere like that where it's accessible but not on the rifle. Bipods are a pain in the ass on your rifle, and if you're only going to use them for a segment of shots, I think it's better just to have it somewhere readily available, because these things hanging off your rifle, they're going to hang up on brush. You know, if you don't use them, they can be a problem with other rests because they're up there and they interfere with sticks or whatever else. So that can be kind of a pain in the ass. And then another example is scabbards. If you're on a horseback hunt, these bipods will not go into a scabbard, even the big scabbards. So a nice removable bipod is nice. And I will say that these Harris bipods pretty much suck on that front, but this GunWerks is awesome, because basically what you have here is you have a little button right here that twists this, and then you can just go right to your pick rail and then twist it back on, and that thing is solid. That's all it takes right there, right? Boom, done. Bipod's on. If I want to take it off, boom, off. Okay, now if you go to a connection like this on a pick rail, like what Hatch uses, or at least maybe they did use, this might have changed. It's a slide on. This is a lot harder to get on and off. It's actually very hard on this GunWerks. It's super tight on the pick rail, but I have to slide this down. It's getting a lot better. At one point I actually rubbed butter on it to get it on there, but I just have to slide that on and off, and you can see it's a lot of work. It's kind of a pain in the ass, and I would call that bipod and that connection, because of that, it's kind of semi-permanent. I don't want to be going on and off with it, but the GunWerks here is great in that regard. It just goes on there really quick and easy. Like I said, I can't use this GunWerks bipod for the seated position, so it's not my personal favorite bipod, but if I'm doing this, where I just want to have the bipod just ready for that prone position, I think it's one of the best options. Now, the MDT, it works pretty well in terms of getting on and off also. It's actually nice because it has an ARCA plate and a pick rail in the head on it. This one actually is a tension knob this way, and it's also a whole lot easier than a slide on. But I would say that this bipod for me You know, depending on the type of hunt, if it's a vehicle-based hunt or something, sure, I can carry this, I can have it readily available. But outside of that, it's a little bit too bulky for me to have mobile. So if you're going that route, right, you're gonna go with a bipod that you're just gonna use for the prone shooting position. You need to have some sort of rest figured out for the seated position. And I've got several right here you can check out. The one that I tend to suggest for the mountain hunter is these. These are just your standard trekking poles. And then I've got this Wiser Precision adapter on there. And these go like that, and you can shoot right across here. And then you've got plenty of extension with your trekking poles. You can get this thing way up high, and you're gonna be able to shoot seated, kneeling all day with this, right? And for most mountain hunters, you're not gonna have a weight penalty or whatever, because you're gonna have trekking poles with you already. And then the other thing I'll say about this little guy right here is, even if I wasn't shooting off of it, and a matter of fact, when I've got my hatch bipod that's got me covered on prone and the seated position, even if I've got that on my rifle, I'll have this on my trekking poles because it keeps my trekking poles together. So if I got them strapped to my backpack, they're more solid, I throw them in the back of my truck, back of my side-by-side or whatever, that little adapter just keeps them together. So another option. Guys, I've been using onX Maps for almost 2 decades now, hunting, guiding, outfitting. It is the gold standard tool when it comes to mapping software in the hunting world. They've been a huge supporter of my content for multiple years. So if you want to support me and you want to support them, use my code CliffG for 20% off at onxmaps.com. It is an awesome tool that I use all the time when I'm preparing for hunts, and I use it almost every single day in the field. For navigation, knowing unit boundaries, knowing private land boundaries, it is the tool you have to have. That you can use for seated or even standing shooting is a good option to add. These trigger sticks, right? So it's actually a tripod here. You can shoot very comfortably standing off of these. You can widen them out. You can shoot very comfortably seated. I know this is gonna come up. Guys are gonna say, well, why don't you just use the tripod that you're glassing off of? That's another option, but for me personally, I just don't like to shoot off of them because a lot of times I'm using that tripod to watch the shot through my spotter. I'll put a phone on there and video it. Even if it's me taking the shot, a lot of times I'll put that on my spotter so I can videotape the shot. If I'm guiding a hunter, same thing. I want to be looking through that spotter to call the shot a lot of the times, or I want to have that video going so I can see what happens on the shot. So I don't like to use my tripod for a shooting rest for that reason. Now, the other nice advantage of these trigger sticks, it's very easy for me to use them as a glassing rest, right? This is kind of hilarious because I'm showing you with some image stabilized binoculars that I probably actually wouldn't do this with, but any other binocular, or even with these, just to keep the motion sickness down, I'll throw them on these sticks and use them. Great for hunts that can accommodate the bulk and the weight and all of that. Not ideal for most mountain hunts. The other thing I find with them is they're loud, right? I don't know why they make them like that. Hear how loud they are? If you are using them in the mountains or really anywhere hunting on stocks or whatever, you got to make sure that you hold these things, because even the strap gets a little loose over time and you don't want that clacking sound. That's a great way to blow up a stock. So the other situation is we've got a nice, tall, solid bipod for that seated position. That's all we're worrying about, right? We're not worried about that low prone position because we find that we don't use it that much in the mountains, or we find that our nice bipod that accommodates us in the seated position, it goes super wide, so it's kind of a hassle to get into that prone position. This is kind of the case for me to some extent. Like I mentioned, I can get prone on that hatch bipod, it's no problem, but I actually personally find that in the hunting situation that I like to just shoot over my pack just the same. You don't have to shoot prone off of a bipod, right? And so if it doesn't work that well for you in the prone position, just consider that you can practice off of other rests, like your backpack. I know that's blasphemy to some people. Like, why would you have a bipod at all if you're not going to shoot prone? But you can do that. And you can practice on a bipod And you can practice on your pack. You can practice shooting over logs. There's nothing irrational about that. And the reality is, like I said when I started this video, true minority of your hunting shot opportunities are going to be in that prone position. So why not be really well equipped for the seated position and then discount that prone position a little bit? So let's talk a little bit about the adjustability of like the bipod head. A lot of these different bipods are going to have different things you can do here, right? The most basic one is Cant, right? So almost all of these bipods, you're going to be able to move the head this way, right? See that? Here you got the same on the hatch, right? There you go. You can level the rifle. And that's a key thing to be able to do in the hunting scenario. You don't want to always have to reach down and adjust the leg. It can blow up a stock. It can blow up a shooting opportunity. If you're going with the Harris bipods, keep in mind it's really relevant because of the cheaper ones. To this day, I believe they don't have Cant. So just something to consider. Now, on that topic, you need to make it where it's kind of hard to do it. You don't want it to be loose, because if it's very loose when you cant the rifle, you're losing part of the point of having the bipod, right? These guys are not magic, right? If there's a lot of flexibility here in the head, then you're going to have more movement there and the shot's not going to be as solid. So you want to be able to tension that where it's actually pretty darn sturdy. And for the MDT here, you can just stick a round in here and you can just adjust that and it'll, it's pretty snug. And then on the hatch, it's got a little lever here that's like a tension lever, right? And then on GunWerks bipod here, right here, you can see it there. It has the same setup as the hatch, just the tension lever for Cant to control the pressure of the Cant, I should say. Some of these you're gonna see, and the MDT does have it, you can pan the rifle, right? I don't use that, and that's why I have it locked. And here's my thought. My thought is that I don't wanna have the pan loose enough to move also, because if I have it loose plus I have the Cant loose, it's basically like shooting off a ball head, right? A tripod ball head. And in that case, you're losing both axes to movement, and therefore you've lost a lot of what the bipod is about. So I don't think that pan is worth it. For me personally, I can just move the rifle. I can pop over the legs of the rifle when I'm, follow-up shots or for animals moving or whatever. I do that. Now, I can see the argument, particularly on a precision thing like the MDT, where you can make that high tension. It takes a little bit to pan, right? But if you're doing that, that means you actually have to reach down and hold the leg as you pan, or it doesn't really matter that you're able to pan, you're still gonna have to move the leg because that thing is so tight, right? So I find that if I have it tight, I gotta hold that and move the rifle. It's kind of up to you. To me, I don't think it's a big factor. I think Cant is a big factor. You should have it on your bipod. The other stuff is pretty debatable. Now, all of these are going to be set up with a certain level of complication. How much angle adjustment do I have on the legs? How much opening here do I have, like on the hatch right here? I basically have here, and then I have open. The MDT, I've got here, I've got low, and then I've got several spots in between, like 4 or 5 of them. And then on the GunWerks here, I think we've got 3. So flat, middle, and then all the way down, right? So we have 3. Now, that adjustment is back to the original ergonomics deal that we talked about, and your personal height and how you're shooting when you're seated, how you're shooting when you're prone. It doesn't matter how many adjustments there are if the adjustments that it does have fit your needs, right? So if it's only 2 different adjustments and that's all you need, if it's only 1 adjustment on that particular angle and that's all you need, then awesome. For me personally, it's actually like that. Like on the hatch, this position right here, I can shoot prone off of it, and then I can shoot seated off of it. I actually don't have to adjust the in and out of the leg. So that's nice. Yes, there is some adjustability. That's great, but I don't ever use it because I can just leave it where it's at in both of those positions. Those are some things that you want to consider, you know, and consider what your preferences are going to be when you're looking at these bipods. All right, guys, so that's bipods. As you can see, it's not about the money you spend. It's not about some little bitty feature that sets this bipod apart from that bipod. It's about matching the bipod with the actual hunting scenario that you're going to run into, the actual shooting positions that you're going to use. So I went over everything you need to know to get the right one for you. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I did a very similar video on elk hunting rifles. I went over 3 different setups across the budget spectrum from like $1,000 to $10,000. The video is right here. Go check it out. Everything you need to know to set up your elk hunting rifle for you within your budget. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you later.